us pray. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and her government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideals, but laying aside all private interests and prejudices, keeping in mind the responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. So may your kingdom come and your name be hallowed. Amen. Please be seated.
Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 74, Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act 2021, adjourned debate. Mr. Scow.
Any members wishing to join the debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise and join debate on Bill 74, the Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act. And Madam Speaker, let me be very clear. Our post-secondary sector in Alberta is in real crisis. We have seen time and time again this government continue to cut and slash and burn our post-secondary industries. Nearly $700 million has been cut from our post-secondary institutions, and we're seeing tuitions rise at, frankly, alarming rates and massive layoffs in our institutions. And to be clear, this will cause long-term and permanent harm to Albertans and to our innovation economy. It's directly contributing to so many people that are choosing to either not come to Alberta or leave Alberta or decide that when they finish their education that they will no longer remain in Alberta. And I think that's something that many of us have heard from, seen. I know I personally have friends who have made this decision. I know I have people who have written me and told me that they're making this decision. I know I've had even researchers reach out and tell me that because of this government's policies, they will no longer remain in Alberta. They're looking for new opportunities. They're looking for different institutions. They're looking either across the country or even out of country, even during this pandemic, because frankly, this government's attack on their research, attack on their institutions is too much. And that's something that I'm hearing time and time again. So, Madam Speaker, it really is time for the government to make some substantive changes in their approach to advanced education. It really is time for the government to reverse its cuts and start repairing the damage they've inflicted on the sector. It's time for the government to actually go out there and make changes that will attract investment, attract innovation, attract talent. And we know they're not doing any of this, right? We know they're not doing anything that would create jobs. We know they're not doing anything that would support our research institutions. No, they're not doing anything that would support the rest of our post-secondary institutions either. And we can see this time and time again because we can see institutions desperate to raise funds because of the massive cuts, desperate to try and find a way to sustain themselves, raising tuition in some cases well over 100 to 200%, right? And when you're talking about creating a sustainable education system, post-secondary education system, when you're talking about creating a sustainable innovation ecosystem, what you don't want is you don't want an unstable environment where students and researchers are unable to determine what their tuition may look like in just 1 year. If they're unable to plan even just 1 year ahead, that means that there is no stability in our post-secondary system. And this bill does nothing to address any of these concerns. This bill does nothing to address how we can actually have a system that would allow Albertans to plan ahead and have a post-secondary education that for over 3 years, whatever type of program you're in, Madam Speaker. If some programs, of course, we know are shorter, some are longer, but regardless, students are unable to plan even if it was just a 2-year program. We know some places grant credentials after 2 years. Even in just a 2-year program, we know students will be unable to plan. And that's how bad the situation has become, right? That's how dramatic it's become. And it's because this government refuses to acknowledge the harms they're causing in our post-secondary education system. I know this bill doesn't do a single thing to restore cuts. It doesn't do a single thing to address the funding problems. But Madam Speaker, it's becoming clear to me in the discussions that have happened in this House that the consultations that happened around this bill were completely inadequate as well. And it's becoming clear to me because despite what government members may be saying, when we talk to stakeholders, when we talk to students' unions, when we talk to institutions, when we talk to administrators, and we talk to researchers, we hear time and time again that the content of the bill is insufficient to address the concerns they've had. And when we look at it, it seems that the most substantive changes are going to be around apprenticeship pays and apprenticeship mentor ratios. But unfortunately, those details aren't available for improving situations that are not in those fields. And it's something that I think is going to be a problem as we move forward, right? It's going to be a problem that this government does not have a holistic view of post-secondary education. It's going to be a problem that the government does not have a holistic view on what is required to support our post-secondary institutions. And it's going to be a problem that this is the best the government can come up with, right? It's going to be a problem that we spent, well, it's over 2 years almost into this term now, Madam Speaker, and the government still cannot come up with a single bill that would encourage people to invest in Alberta and encourage people to learn in Alberta and to educate themselves in Alberta. So Madam Speaker, I think it's going to be very clear that we need to have some more work done on this bill. And I think it's going to be very clear that we're going to need to hear from more stakeholders on this bill. We're going to have to hear from more industry and more people that actually work in these fields and do research in these fields. So at this time, I think I do have an amendment I'd like to move.
This will be known as Amendment REF1. The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think that, oh, sorry, I have to read this in. I would move that the motion for second reading of Bill 74, Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act 2021, be amended by deleting all of the words after that and substituting the following. Bill 74, Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act 2021, be not now read a second time, but that the subject matter of the bill be referred to the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future in accordance with Standing Order 74.2. Thank you. So I think that very clearly what I'm proposing here is a common sense amendment, right? We're talking about a bill that as it's written, talks about setting up a strategic council to look at post-secondaries beyond 2030, and talks about how we're going to be setting up these systems that will allow them to advise the minister on policies and direction, but none of the details on how the strategic council should work, or in there, none of the funding details, none of the criteria, nothing that's important, I think, in terms of making sure our institutions are sustainable are going to be in the bill. And I think that there's a strong reason we need to go to committee on this. The strong reason is going to be because we need to have actual post-secondary institutions, actual people who are working in post-secondary institutions, whether that's in administrative roles or in research roles, or in educational roles. Across the entire industry, we should have people engaging on this process, right? And when we're talking about our polytechnic institutes, for example, when we're talking about NAIT, we're talking about SAIT, we're talking about polytechnics across the entire province, we're talking about an ecosystem, a group of educators who are really creating our next generation of workers for this province, right? And in many cases, these are very technical and complex jobs, right? We're talking about people who either need to earn trade certifications or other certifications, such as technical certifications in computers or in things like solar installation, whatever it is, Madam Speaker. When we look at these roles, we know that there's a large place for these post-secondary and polytechnics to play in our in our economy. But we do see is that this government continues to cut and slash and burn these institutions, right? And we see that time and time again. We know that right now over $700 million, or almost $700 million has been cut from post-secondary institutions, right? We know that hundreds of millions of dollars have been cut from post-secondary institutions. We know that tuition is massively rising. We're seeing layoffs across almost every institution, and indeed some institutions such as Athabasca University are being forced to close their doors, right? There's not even going to be a building in Athabasca anymore, right? So, Madam Speaker, when we see this happen time and time again, it becomes abundantly clear that this government is simply not taking the steps that are required and not listening to the stakeholders on how to have the industry act in a meaningful way to prepare Albertans for our future economy. And I think that's something that's very concerning, right? I think it's something that everybody should be worried about in this place, because we're talking about the people who are, and we're not talking about far off timelines, Madam Speaker. We're not talking about people who are going to be in our education or working in our economy in 10 or 15 years, Madam Speaker. We're talking about people who are going to be entering our workforce in a year or in 2 years, right? We're talking about people who are currently in our post-secondary systems, who are currently doing research in our post-secondary institutions, who are currently trying to innovate in our post-secondary institutions and receiving nearly no support from this government. And these are the people that need to be at the table, right? These are the Albertans that we need to listen to. I know this government has a problem listening to Albertans. I know this government has a problem engaging with Albertans. I know this government likes to put in their earplugs and not listen to Albertans. And that's unfortunate, Madam Speaker, but I think that if we were go to committee, I think that if we were able to have a proper consultation process, if we were able to set up a proper framework at the Alberta's Economic Future Committee, we'd be able to have those conversations, and the government would frankly be forced to listen, right? The government would be forced to sit there and have Albertans tell them what they're doing wrong. And Madam Speaker, let me tell you, Albertans have a lot to say about what this government is doing wrong, but specifically when we look at post-secondary, specifically when we look at our advanced education institutions, we know that the continued slash and burn, the continued degradation of our advanced education infrastructure, whether that's in the delaying paying for deferred maintenance, whether that's in the direct cuts, there's so much going on in our institutions, Madam Speaker, that Albertans deserve to have their voice at the table, right? They deserve to be able to come to committee. They deserve to be able to actually engage with their elected officials. And instead of, as we've seen with various media reports, Madam Speaker, the government basically ignoring thousands of emails from so many different topics. And we know that the government continues to do this. But that's why I think that this House should tell the government that they have to go to committee, they have to listen, they have to stop, slow down this bill, and actually get it right. They have to actually engage with their constituents. They have to actually engage with the stakeholders and do proper consultation. And Madam Speaker, that's of course a power this House has, but it's something that I think would send a very strong message to the government. It would send a very strong message that this is something this House believes in, that every single MLA here, whether you're an opposition MLA or a government backbencher, maybe you're one of the half of caucus who's been passed over for cabinet time and time again, you can send a message to your cabinet right now. You can send a message to them and say, you believe in consultation, you believe in engaging with your constituents, you believe in engaging with Albertans. And Madam Speaker, if I was one of the members who was passed over, one of the half of the UCP caucus, give or take, that has passed over for cabinet time and time again, or even removed from cabinet without any reason given and no thanks given at a press conference. If I was one of those people who was removed from cabinet, maybe I would be upset as well. Unfortunately, it looks like they're complicit. They're willing to sit down and support this premier. They're willing to sit down and support this UCP government, and that's really unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate because we know right now, Madam Speaker, that this government's lack of consultation, lack of engagement on bills just like this, where they won't engage in the advanced education stakeholders, where they won't engage with Albertans. We know that's why this government is frankly has disillusioned so many Albertans, why so few people support this government, why I receive thousands of emails every single day about how angry they are with this government, Madam Speaker. So it's frankly shocking that the government members would not, and government backbenchers would not support more consultation, right? We saw them on the opposite side. We saw them when they were in opposition spend hours and hours and hours talking about how important it was to consult, how important it was to engage, how important it was to to have that discussion. And now that that they're sitting in the government benches, Madam Speaker, it appears that none of that applies anymore, right? Now that they're supporting the Premier, now that they're supporting this UCP Premier, none of that applies anymore. They don't have to listen. They don't think it's important to engage with Albertans. They don't think it's important that Albertans have their say. And that's just a pattern with this government, right? That's just the behavior that Albertans have become used to with this government. And I think it's very disappointing. I think Albertans are disappointed. And I think they're going to reflect that when we see Albertans go to the polls. And unfortunately, I think the government has a chance to turn that around, right? The government has a chance to change that. Backbenchers specifically have a chance to change that. They can tell their Premier, they can tell their cabinet what they think. They can tell them that they believe engagement is important. They can tell them they believe that this bill does not have enough details, does not have the specifics, does not address rising tuition, does not address massive layoffs in post-secondary, does not address the permanent harm that's being done in so many constituencies across the province. I know basically every single person in this place will have a constituent who's trying to attend or currently attending one of these post-secondary institutions. And Madam Speaker, those are the Albertans we should be talking about and talking to right now. And instead of doing that, we see basically half the UCP caucus, the half that aren't in cabinet, have either been removed or were passed over from cabinet. We see those members continue to support this government that will not engage with Albertans, and that is the reason, Madam Speaker, the reason that those members need to have a real hard look in the mirror and realize that we need to start talking with the people. We need to start listening to Albertans. We need to start listening to the people who sent us to this place, to start listening to the people who actually have stakes in our jobs, of course, but of course in their education as well.
Honourable Member, I would have helped you with that one, but there was very little time left in the Honourable Member's speech. However, the Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne is the first one to stand and will be recognized to speak.
I was actually looking to have an intervention, but that didn't quite work out. So maybe one day the opposition will cede their time and see if we can try this new item out. They like to fire a lot of shots across the bow, but not necessarily allow any response or fulsome debate in here other than a pontification stump speech that's going to be tweeted out as we speak over to the many followers. The member brings some items up that I would like to address in regards to consultation and where we got to on one part of this bill. Now, if you're looking at this bill in singularity, there might be some concerns. And Madam Speaker, if the member had shown up and paid attention while we were talking about the Skilled Trades Task Force over the last 2 years, and I'm going to rattle through again, probably if Hansard could check this or anybody else, probably for about the 10th time, talking about what took place to do the consultation and come up with some of the recommendations. So some of the members on this, Glenn Feltham, he was the co-chair, former president and CEO of Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. We had David Ross, co-chair, president and CEO of Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. We had MLA from Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville, again, skilled tradesperson herself. Brad Bagnall, instructor, Trade Center, Excellence, Bowness High School. Jamie Bevan, the chair of the Alberta Apprenticeship and Industry Training Board. Stuart Coltham, president of Olds College. Ann Everett, president and CEO of Northern Lakes College. Myself, Laura Joe Gunter, president and CEO of Bow Valley College. Paul Haynes, CEO of Alberta Glass. Dave King, School of Trades and Technology in Lakeland College. Ray Macy, president, Skills Canada. Nigel, president, CEO of Careers, The Next Generation. Terry O'Flynn, president, founding partner of Prism Flow Products. Terry Parker, this one the member should really pay attention to. It's almost as exciting as his fixation on cheesies the last couple of weeks. Terry Parker, executive director of Building Trades in Alberta. Dennis Perrin, Alberta of the Prairies director, Christian Labor Association. Amanda Rosenchuk, senior vice president, Drainage Services, EPCOR, and also from Women Building Futures. Tony Tomkowicz, sorry Tony if I messed your name up again, Provincial Apprenticeship Committee, Industrials, the Millwright. Paul Verison, President, CEO of Clark Builders. Colin Ward, Chief Operating Officer, Ward Brothers Construction. Jason Wright, Director in Education Apprenticeship, Sheet Metal Workers, Local 8 President, Building Trades of Alberta Training Society. Isn't that a mouthful? Now this group went out and we consulted We brought people in from industry. It was over a year and a half, basically, because it was interrupted by COVID. We talked about all the items that the member was bringing up about consultation, dealing with trades, even parents, students, different directors in these universities, looking at how we could expand outside of our present model, looking to other jurisdictions throughout the world, the best practices, if you would. Malaysia came to the table. We had some Asian models. We had a British model. We had a Germanic model. We looked into Switzerland, just to name a few. And again, Madam Speaker, being cognizant of the time and how many times we've spoken about this, this is what we did. True consultation, talking to people in all facets, in all areas, not just a microscope fixated on one group that the member seems to talk about all the time. Now, I'm sure the member, this might jog his memory, and I'm sure other folks would like to speak to it, but I really do want to suggest that consultation has taken place. There's a couple items on the main bill that we want to talk about, perhaps, and get more clarification on, and I'd be happy to get to the main bill to do that. So I would highly recommend to the rest of the members in here today that we vote down the amendment. We don't have to go back to committee. Let's try to get the things happening that this board, the recommendations coming from the Skilled Trade Task Force had actually made based on all of that consultation up to this point. So we can get the ball moving forward, get Albertans back to work, tweak where we need to be so we can be a very competitive in the jurisdictions and support a very fulsome and diverse economy of where our future is for ourselves and for our kids. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any members wishing to join the debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to join the debate. And we're speaking to the referral motion, REF1, that this Bill 74, Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act 2021, be amended by deleting the words after that and be not read a second time, but that the subject matter of the bill be referred to Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future in accordance with Standing Order 74.2. So I'd like to speak in favor of this amendment and just encourage all of my colleagues in this House to also vote in favor of it. It's very timely. You know, I had the opportunity to meet with the University of Alberta's student executive. I met with the president and the vice president external just last week. And certainly, Bill 74 was top of mind for those students. And especially because, of course, we know that Budget 2021, 21-22, I mean, was really targeted so strongly at the University of Alberta, which I'll just share with the House once again is in the riding that I represent and certainly is my alma mater from, I think we established that before, 40 years ago, I think. And certainly I've had 2 of my 3 sons attend the University of Alberta. One still currently in school there in the 3rd year. And so it certainly is heartbreaking to see what the UCP government is doing to attack specifically the University of Alberta. They are bearing 50% of the cuts for the post-secondary education system across Alberta. It's about $126 million is being cut in this year's budget, and $60 million of it is at the University of Alberta. The University of Alberta has about 25% of the students in the province, yet they have to bear the brunt of 50% of the cost. So, you know, Madam Speaker, I must tell you that this is devastating for the university. And it's devastating for the students and the programs. It's devastating for the professors, for the staff that support both students and professors at the university. And we know that since the UCP government was elected, this is in the whole post-secondary, 1,500 full-time equivalent staff have been laid off. Almost $700 million has been cut from to the advanced eds budget. And, you know, these are very substantial numbers. And, of course, it's creating a very negative impact in our post-secondary institutions. And certainly, at U of A, as I've already articulated, has experienced a significant hit, you know, more than really is fair. So, you know, certainly that's important for that to be on the record. And having met with the students, I could hear clearly their concerns about Bill 74, and I would say that absolutely they would be grateful to have this bill not read a second time and moved to committee, because there's so much that's missing. There's so much that needs to be shifted, and a lot of what is before us today is not being addressed. So the students would like to say so much more. Go ahead.
So I haven't had a chance to meet with students recently. I mean, we certainly did. It's been a lot more difficult during COVID, but I'm really interested to hear a lot more. I mean, the member opposite, talked at length about how much they consult regularly, which is not what we see in most cases. So I'm just wondering if you could just expand on what the students are saying, if they feel consulted, and what their primary concerns were. So I think their voices are very important voices in this debate.
Yeah, thank you very much, the member from St. Albert. Yeah, certainly the president of the University of Alberta Student Council is Rowan Lay, and the vice president external is Christian Fontaine. And both of them were, very specific about the concerns that they had regarding the legislation and just the key issues that are happening at the University of Alberta. And certainly we know that, also I just wanted to mention that Rowan Lay, the president of the University of Alberta Student Council, is also the president of CAUSE, which is the College and University Association of Alberta First. So that covers all of the institutions. So he's in a very key role. He not only understands what's happening at U of A, he also understands what's happening across this sector. So his analysis is extremely important. And certainly one of the major issues that the U of A is certainly concerned about is just the exceptional tuition increase. And it's really, gobsmacking, I would say, sort of jaw-dropping, how much these exceptional tuition increases are going to impact the students. And it's not sort of that cap of 7%. These are faculties that got an exceptional tuition increase, and there's several of them. For example, Bachelor of Commerce, 22%. The Bachelor of Science in Engineering is 24.5%. The Bachelor of Science in Medical Laboratory Science is 17%. Law is 29%. Pharmacy is 44%. And this tops it up. This is the Master's in Counseling Psychology. It's going up 100%. These are devastating numbers. This is really hitting people who are so vulnerable. They're, young folks, generally, not always. Some of them are going back to school at a later age. But regardless, to have a hit of that significant an increase in a short period of time, I would think that some people would have to have either gigantic student loans that they'll have the burden of having to pay off for years to come, or feeling like they just can't shoulder that burden. And what should we be doing in Alberta? We should be supporting young people, supporting people who want to advance their education, not make it harder and harder for them. Another one that's sort of, gobsmacking is the MBA. It's 71%, a bit more than 71% is the tuition increase. So, these are devastating to students. So, this is what, these issues around tuition increases, really, the decision of the UCP government to really pull out of this sector in terms of the support that's so important. And we know so many reasons that it is for us to support the post-secondary education sector. Okay. Sir.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to hear more. Actually, you're describing some really significant barriers to education. It's like huge barriers to education. And I think, which is really quite interesting, if you look at the preamble of Bill 74, really talks about making post-secondary education accessible to all and regardless of location, and addressing barriers. And I'm wondering, you're the mom of 3 sons, 2 of which have attended or are attending university. you yourself have done that as a single parent, putting students through post-secondary. I wonder if you can talk or expand on these barriers and truly how they do really link to the concerns about mental health that we hear time and again from post-secondary students. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to the member from St. Albert for that important question. And, you know, as I've already articulated, going through all those different faculties, the very significant increases mean that people can't fulfill on their dreams, you know? And isn't that what we as government should be doing? We should be supporting young people to be able to educate themselves and, you know, follow the career paths that they want to. But this will make people, you know, pause because it is so significant, and I would say the average Albertan can't shoulder it, or will have, you know, very negative consequences for years to come with being burdened by student debt. And so those, you know, and certainly, you know, I'm talking about the students already sort of at school, but what about ones who are looking in and sort of wanting to explore it? I'm sure that many will say, I'm not going to do that. And that will mean perhaps they can't realize their potential, they can't fulfill on their dreams, because the fees are so significant. And we all know that when we can follow our dreams, when we can have choice in our world, that really is very important for our well-being, you know, for our families' well-being, everyone's well-being. So if we feel confined, we feel like it's hopeless, we can't do that, that's going to be too hard, the burden of the cost of it, you know, the consequences can be devastating to people. And this is, you know, besides this significant exceptional increase in these faculties that I'm talking about, that was the second point that both the president and the vice president of the University of Alberta Student Council talked about, is just the significant challenges to mental health that students are experiencing. And they had quite a few specifics about what was needed. You know, they talk about how University of Lethbridge was granted $147 per full, they call it a full load equivalent, an FLE, back some time ago, and they were able to drastically reduce their wait lists for people wanting to access support for their mental health. So being able to talk with a counselor, have help navigating resources. You know, oftentimes when you're experiencing something that's some kind of a mental health episode, you're overwhelmed. You don't know where to turn. You don't know what to do. And so having people to support students to be able to navigate the systems and get that support, get that grounding that they need, can really put them on strong footing again. But if those resources are not available, then people may go down pathways that are not supportive, and we know that then they can spiral into deeper depression, anxiety. You know, we know that addiction, they will self-medicate sometimes with addiction, you know, behaviors. And so, you know, and these are generally fairly young people who are, you know, stepping out into the world, trying to develop themselves as people, and still, you know, there's a few steps forward, a few steps back. So if at that specific time, if we as a society, you know, as a government, can really be responsible and support people to have positive mental health, you know, the benefits will be 100-fold. Because we will be supporting people to, you know, establish themselves in their academic studies and move on to a career and be able to then, you know, be contributing members of our society. But if they get taken out, if they get overwhelmed, and there's no one there for them, then it means that could be a liability for sure.
Thank you. You know, that is quite fascinating, and I just wanted to, well,
It's
glad you find that entertaining.
Hopefully you'll join in the debate.
So one of the things I wanted to ask the member was about, you know, I know that when I read this piece of legislation, and heard from the minister, I was actually quite disappointed that this piece of legislation, I think every piece of legislation deserves our time to go through and to understand, and I was disappointed just at how far it didn't go, considering we spent $3.7 million on a report, Alberta 2030, that outlined 6 pillars, and then you look at this legislation, the pieces don't really align, and I think, what you're describing about poverty and mental health and how much more difficult it is for people to access post-secondary education sort of flies in the face of Alberta 2030 report. So I'm wondering if the member can just expand on, I know I'm actually disappointed by this legislation.
Is that it? Oh, it's me. Okay, yeah. Well, thank you very much to the member from St. Albert for, those questions. And certainly, yeah, the document that the Minister of Advanced Education has talked about extensively regarding this Alberta 2030 plan. And I did speak about this earlier in my remarks. I mean, that I understand Bill 74 is sort of foundational to that document, but yet that document is very narrow, really, in its scope and focus. And I think, I question whether it is a visionary document because it talks quite narrowly about what post-secondary is about. Post-secondary is about much more than just getting a job. So post-secondary is about creating citizenship, developing ourselves as humans on the planet, and it's not just about getting a job. And that's totally the title of the document, that it just talks about jobs. So it's not a very visionary document, and I think, we have, and we also know it cost an extraordinary amount of money, and whether that money was well spent, I question for sure. But I'd like to just continue to talk a little bit more about mental health, because this was a really key focus of the students when I spoke to them. So as I was saying, that University of Lethbridge was really able to cut their wait list when they received about $147, and based on sort of cost of living increases over the years, the students have calculated that if they received now $165 per full load equivalent for students, that would really make a significant difference to be able to support students' mental health. And so that is an important ask that the students have for the minister. And of course, it is seems to be not something that this bill addresses or puts any funding behind. And that is very disappointing, because I think that is a significant need in this community. I mean, students are learning post-secondary, in a time of COVID. And so I know for the last 2 years, I mean, this year they're back in the classrooms. Most of them, I think there still is a little bit of online learning, and sometimes I know the U of A did, suspend classes and only had online learning already this fall due to the 4th wave of COVID. So it's challenging, and I know that many students, found that hard to be at home 24/7 kind of, and so that impacts people's mental health also, because they don't have that interaction, because we're all social creatures and we want to be connected with people, and certainly, that's part of the university experience, being connected with the fellow students. And so I guess what I'm trying to articulate here is that there's been significant stress on students, and there's been huge issues because of COVID, now with this extraordinary increase in tuition, and besides the regular stresses of feeling, trying to feel out, like, what does my professor want from me? What are the demands of the course load that I'm taking? Maybe I'm living alone for the first time, or living away from the home that I grew up in. So these are all things that students have to manage and deal with, and sometimes they need supports. And I think it's really incumbent on the government to make sure that those supports are available for them. So I just really encourage Minister of Advanced Education to please invest in that area. And that's an important part of support for students when they are, going to university. So I guess I just really want to make it clear that U of A has really done significant work to be respectful of the UCP government's demand for them to cut back. And they have, really done extraordinary things in terms of reorganization. They have this plan where they've been grouping now 13 of their faculties into 3 colleges. They've decreased administrative costs with a total savings of $95 million. They've changed procurement processes and are rethinking the use of space to create an additional $32 million in savings. So these aren't small things. I mean, I could just read them off easily, but these aren't small things. These are huge changes the U of A has made to be respectful of the demands of this UCP government. But yet again, this year they asked them to do more.
Honourable members wishing to join the debate. The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm really grateful to stand and speak against the amendment to Bill 74, the Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act. The reason I'm opposed to this amendment is that it's not a substantive amendment. It's really a procedural game. Madam Speaker, I had the opportunity actually to meet with the Alberta Students Executive Council yesterday evening. They had a social, and they invited me, and I attended. And they're meeting with a number of government representatives I know throughout this week. I asked those student leaders, and in attendance was the student president from Red Deer Polytechnic, but I asked the student leaders about how things were going and what their impressions were during this year. And Madam Speaker, I have a great concern and frankly a great love for our young adults who are attending post-secondary schooling. I know for myself, I've been greatly blessed by an intentional education, and as a father of 2 young adults myself, with COVID and some of the things that they've been asked to sacrifice, I want to see our young adults have the same opportunities that those of us in the legislature enjoyed. And I appreciate the discussion by the member opposite about mental health. One of the comments that was made to me by one of the students' leaders is that a job is the best social program. And that's true, actually. Students are attending, these young adults are attending post-secondary education to pursue their passion, to seek happiness as they individually see fit. And the best thing that we can do as a government is to provide them with opportunity and a strong economy so that when they do graduate, they have those opportunities. I'm grateful that the Building Skills for Jobs has that focus. One of the motivating forces for me to run is I really wanted to make sure that the public was at the heart of all of our government programs and services. And as it relates to education then, my deep desire is to see the students kept at the heart of our education system. And I do believe that the status quo can be better, and I'm grateful for the effort of the minister to try and improve from the status quo to give students an intentional education, the skills and knowledge that will allow them to seek happiness as they individually see fit, to live where they want to live, to raise their families, and just seek happiness as they individually see fit. Now, speaking a little bit on specifics, of course, in my particular constituency, Red Deer Polytechnic is there. And at the time, when I was a young man, I attended, it was Red Deer College at the time, and I loved my education at Red Deer College. Not only did I appreciate the small classroom settings, the personalized education, the great teachers and peers that I was able to meet, but the value of that education is such a great investment. Sorry?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just intervening for my colleague from Red Deer South. Just wondering if he would go back to talking with the students last night, if he happened to talk about Alberta 2030 and that extensive consultation. We've heard from members opposite that we should do more, and yet yesterday during debate they were talking at length of how much we've gone too much. We do too many things. Enough time for talk to start for action. So I just wonder if he would share a little bit about that consultation that we did, Alberta 2030, as well as his experience in talking to those students about that, if he would. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I didn't have a specific agenda when I went and met with these students. I just like young adults. Maybe it's because I'm getting a little bit older, and being around young adults helps me feel younger. And I appreciate some of my colleagues in this House, who are youthful and help inspire me to try and have more energy. But and there's some energetic people, the members opposite, for sure. I appreciate the member from Edmonton South. He inspires me with his energy. He's very energetic when he is speaking, and I appreciate his energy and enthusiasm. But I do deeply care about our young people, and I did ask them in the course of our discussions because I just wanted to have an honest and frank discussion about how things were going for them. And in the course of our discussions, 2030 did come up. And there's many aspects of 2030 which they agree with. And speaking specifically as it relates to Red Deer Polytechnic and the president, the student leaders at Red Deer Polytechnic, they are very supportive of Red Deer College transitioning to become Red Deer Polytechnic. More so, Madam Speaker, than they were as it relates to Red Deer University. And I want to talk about why that would be the case. Why would that be the case? And I must confess, Madam Speaker, when I first became an MLA, because I do deeply care about Red Deer College, not only did I attend there, I actually volunteered and taught there. I taught their taxation course at the Donald School of Business there, which is named after Jack Donald, who is the founder of Fast Gas. Just a great example of a local Alberta entrepreneur who gave generously back to our community. And of course, I've donated there over the years, and I've just really, I just really want to see our institution be the best it can be. Yeah, sorry? I digressed a bit. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I do want to hear about that transition of Red Deer College becoming a polytechnic, as the Lethbridge College is also seeking that transition right now. And I believe we could learn a lot from you in that transition. And I'd like to hear more about how the students benefit and appreciate that advancement. Anything that I can learn from you to take back that we could possibly see that happen for Lethbridge College as well, I think benefits students across the province. And again, it just shows the members' dedication to its constituency and taking their needs forward and helping students actually get the education that they need so they can be successful in their careers as they graduate and move on in their lives, which is exactly what I believe that we're trying to do with this legislation. So if the member would share with that experience, that'd be great.
Actually, I'd be very happy to do that. Coincidentally, when I attended this social last night, I sat across from the student president at Lethbridge College and had an opportunity to talk to her about why I was excited about the opportunity that Red Deer Polytechnic had and how it supported them. The reason why the students at Red Deer Polytechnic supported that change is because in our particular, in Central Alberta, we have a really strong trades program, trades and technology program. Madam Speaker, actually my son attended the apprenticing to become an electrician at Red Deer Polytechnic and received a great education there and had a great experience. But under our model, if you look at U of C and U of A, which are great institutions, absolutely, U of L, these are great public universities in our province, but those particular institutions don't have trades training. Whereas institutions like Nate and Sate, and incidentally, as I was meeting with the student leaders yesterday, I learned something that I wasn't aware of, and that is Nate and Sate, between the two of them, graduate about 25% of all of the trades graduates in the entire country. And if that's true, that surprised me. But that speaks to a few things. First of all, the entrepreneurial spirit of industry in our province, and the opportunities that we do provide for our young adults who come from throughout the country and frankly throughout the world for opportunity to seek and pursue their dreams. So as it relates to Red Deer Polytechnic, we have a strong trades program. And I know for myself, it's important to be good at, I would prefer to be good at fewer things but do it really well than try and do a whole bunch of things and not be very good at it. As it relates to Red Deer College, in my honest view, Red Deer will be a much better polytechnic that is unique and special, more so than it would be as a university. And it's really important that we play to our strengths, and that's how it is in the real world. Madam Speaker, I know that there are many things I'm not very good at. I know that. My good wife helps me understand that and observe that sometimes, and I'm grateful for that. So are my children sometimes. But I know that it's really important to succeed in life, that we understand what we're good at and what we're not. And certainly, in the real world, I'm not very good at fixing things. Actually, my adult sons are quite good at fixing things. And it's important to appreciate your strengths and weaknesses. And the polytechnic status for Red Deer allows it to become something that is unique and special. The great thing about a polytechnic is it gives Red Deer the autonomy to offer more applied degrees, just like Nate and Sate. Yeah, and I see an intervention.
Well, thank you for the member from Red Deer. Again, you just struck on a chord here. There's two parts. So we're speaking to an amendment that, even though all this fulsome conversation that we've had, even though we've consulted, I really appreciate the fact that you're seeing the same thing in your areas. I've been reached out to as well from folks from the U of A and otherwise. And it's usually that slant, and it's understanding that the polytechnical, the trades, and universities aren't competitive. They're actually complementary to each other. So you kind of struck a chord on there. We're recognizing each one's skills and attributes are actually complementary. Maybe you can expand on that in the real world of how these integrate together. And the other item that you struck on was understanding our strengths, working to our strengths rather than trying to be all for everything. Be very proficient at what you have and build on those strengths. So if you could expand on that, please, sir.
No, and I thank you for that question. Over the years of practice as a tax lawyer, I have received a great intentional education, but I don't think of the trades at all any less than my formal education. Madam Speaker, I had the privilege to work with so many great men and women in Central Alberta from all walks of life that pursued their passion and were really successful, Madam Speaker, creating jobs and providing goods and services that the public valued. And some of these individuals didn't have a formal education. Some did. Some had a trades background. Some did not. But one of the things that really attracted me, Madam Speaker, I worked for a period of time as a tax lawyer in downtown Calgary. But I would go and visit my home where I grew up as a young man in Red Deer, and I would see all these great local businesses. And I really admire and appreciate entrepreneurs who make something out of nothing, who create goods and services that are valued, and create jobs and livelihoods for families in our community. And I have such a great admiration for that. But in the Red Deer area, we have a fairly diversified economy. We have, of course, oil and gas services and production. We have a strong agricultural sector. We have tourism and growth in terms of construction, like many areas of Alberta. I feel Central Alberta is a very special place. We have a wonderful location in the dynamic Edmonton-Calgary corridor. And so I really consider some unique advantages in Central Alberta. And I appreciate that throughout the province, be it some of our larger centers or some of our other centers, that there are unique competitive advantages for everywhere. And what makes where we live and where we serve is the great families and individuals that we try and serve in it. That's more actually important than geography, is the people that we are able to serve. But as it relates to Red Deer and Central Alberta, we do have a strong concentration of individuals who are skilled tradespeople. And with that skilled trades population, there are many jobs and businesses that do demand that. And so the polytechnic focus of Red Deer College allows us to support the local economy better. The other neat thing, though, with polytechnic status is, yes, we do get to grant degrees. I know that Red Deer Polytechnic has some of its own degrees that aren't in collaboration with other institutions, but independent standalone degrees. And I know that they also have an application in for a commerce degree, so that business students, unlike myself, who started their education, are able to complete that in their local community and then get hired by local businesses to live and work and to contribute to the economy that they want to call home. So polytechnic status as it relates to Red Deer College complements its competencies and strengths with a focus of providing its students with practical knowledge and experience, employable skills. And Madam Speaker, one of the reasons I was motivated to run is that the NDP, and I appreciate, I don't think everything the NDP did was bad. I never want to be categorical. But one thing that they didn't do well is they didn't create jobs, Madam Speaker, and the private sector underwent and lost tens of thousands of private sector jobs from when they started their term in office to when they finished. And that, to me, is the worst thing that we can actually do for our young adults. They work so hard to get their education, to pursue their passion. And, it would be very disappointing to work so hard and then not to have a job in your desired profession. And government can't completely right all of that. No government can. But I do feel that our policies, and indeed 2030, by providing a focus on marketable skills and knowledge that will allow for more employment demand is moving in the right direction. So I know that there was extensive consultation. I know that the student leaders that I met with generally support the 2030 vision, which this legislation is in furtherance of that vision. I know that as it relates specifically to being a polytechnic, in terms of that focus on skills for jobs, it will bless my community, and most important, the students who are going to school.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Decore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate the chance this morning to rejoin the conversation around Bill 74 and, of course, the referral amendment to committee here. I've listened intently. And, of course, I've noticed this morning we seem to be spending a lot of time around consultation. And so I find myself in a rather familiar position as I've found throughout the course of the 30th legislature. And again, I'll end up issuing a challenge to members of the government and members of the government caucus, like I've done in the past. I'll get to that in a moment as to why that's important. But when I'm thinking about what I've heard this morning around consultation, and you know, I do appreciate the member from Lac-Saint-Anne Parkland for trying to list off some of the people. I remember being in that exact, not quite the exact same position. I was like, I think, a chair over from you doing that. But as you'll remember, Madam Speaker, having served in the 29th legislature as well, along with me, at the time, the members of the opposition were very, very adamant that they wanted to see the list of people that were consulted with. Every single time. Well, who did you consult with on this bill? We want to see that list. Why don't you table it? And so here's that challenge. Are we going to see that list? Because I remember, again, standing up almost in that same spot and spending at least 2/3 of my time, and I only remember going through, it was like half the list, and I was hitting all the high levels of groups and organizations that represented a significant amount of Albertans. But that wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. They still wanted to see the list. And then on top of that, it was like, well, you didn't consult with these guys and those persons and everything like that. So the challenge is, perhaps maybe we'll see a member of the government or a member of the government caucus table that entire list of who was consulted with on Bill 74. But one of the things that I noticed that you kind of didn't highlight at the time, which was very conspicuously missing, was students. And so, you know, listening to the member for Red Deer South talking about getting a chance to visit with students at the time, the problem is they were meeting this week or even last week, and I'm kind of wondering, the bill is already before us. So isn't that kind of like consultations after the fact? Which seems to be a bit of a challenge for me. Why didn't you consult before that? And so maybe I'll give way here and give the member from Lac-Saint-Anne a chance to perhaps maybe explain why it seems students were missing from that list.
Madam Speaker, hell has not frozen over. I stand corrected. This intervention thing might work with some of the members across the aisle, and I absolutely appreciate the member from Rutherford for doing this. Well done. And even when he gives me heck in the media, he still calls me a freedom fighter, so I still take that as a compliment any day of the week. Specifically with Bill 74, the member is correct in the sense that nothing has been tabled to date when it came to student consultations. But when I had spoken before, it was in the broader context of this is only one part of a bunch of the items that were brought forward. So what I can do is I'll commit, and I can't tell you when because it'll take me a little time to do it, as you understand from this side, to pull together from the task force of the students that we've engaged with and that I personally engaged with about the greater and broader context. Obviously, you know full well I can't make commitments for a minister. So hopefully that works. And again, member from Rutherford, thank you for letting me do an intervention and lose a bet.
Here, here.
On interventions, you still are to speak through the chair. You don't remember.
Speaker, I guess I would hope that I will never ever be accused of not being fair. Don't get too excited. I mean, I don't know if I'll do that on a regular basis, but we'll see. Well, but what I am hoping to see, though, should we get to see a list of who was consulted with, hopefully it might have been some of maybe the students that call Edmonton Decor home. As I've mentioned before, I have all three of the high schools in North Edmonton, north of the Yellowhead Freeway. And so the concerns that I've heard from them about being able to actually attend post-secondary is an actual significant concern for those students. As I mentioned, even in my own journey, when I attended NAIT, had it not been for the athletic scholarship that I qualified for, getting a chance to play basketball for NAIT, it might have been a challenge for me to be able to attend school, even with a student loan. And my friend from earlier was talking about how some of the programs that had increased in tuition, those are some significant tuition increases, which I think will pose a very significant barrier, at least for some of the students that are looking to attend post-secondary education who call Edmonton Decor home. And so, I have noticed that, when we table bills in this House, they sometimes proceed rather quickly. And the problem is after the fact, once you've consulted, even though you've heard from them, the bill's already here, we don't see any changes, and those poor students are still going to be in the exact same boat. They're not going to be able to afford to attend post-secondary education. So by stopping the process for a moment and pausing, we get a chance to send this to committee, and maybe we can actually bring those students in so that we can hear from them directly. And so, and I'm happy to give way to my friend from Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you to my friend from Edmonton Decor. He raised an important issue that I think needs to be highlighted because we've heard time and again how much tuition has increased, and I think the member from Edmonton Decor is correct in raising the concerns that he's hearing from students in his constituency about the cost of going to school. But there's also that other piece of student supports. And I've certainly heard from constituents in in Edmonton Gold Bar that they find the system of student supports very confusing, very difficult to navigate, and there just isn't enough money there to help them achieve their dreams of going to university. And I'm wondering if my friend from Edmonton Decor has heard something similar, and if perhaps he would be interested in having the committee dig into these issues of financial supports for students in his constituency.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Speaker. That is actually a very significant concern. And not only just for upcoming students, as I said, getting a chance to speak with high school students that are getting ready to look at the future, but even for people that are going back to school. I'd mentioned earlier in debate, speaking to a single mom who, when she found out about $25 a day childcare, cried because she actually believed now she'll be able to go back to post-secondary education, get some schooling, and improve the lives for her and her children. She was a little concerned. She thought it was going to be tough, but that childcare was going to make the difference. But now that we've seen that taken away, and we don't know when we may see a childcare program that will make that kind of difference. If we actually get the chance to send Bill 74 to committee through the amendment, I think we'll get a chance to invite these kinds of individuals to present to the committee or to submit to a committee their thoughts around how some of these changes that we've seen up to this point negatively impacting post-secondary education. $700 million plus in cuts is not a small number, and we've seen how post-secondary staff have been laid off. So now you have the challenge of possibly not being able to afford to go with rising tuition costs, rising student loan interest rates going up. Will staff even be there to be able to train them in their chosen field of endeavors? And so, you start to combine all of these things. This is actually putting up significant barriers to people being able to attend post-secondary education. And so, we add things like, for instance, the elimination of STEP. Again, that was one avenue that I know throughout the years has been very, very well used as an avenue for students to be able to get that education. And so I guess by pressing the pause button, nobody's saying that, this shouldn't be enacted. But at the very least, we need to hear from the students that will be directly affected by this bill. And there's only so much, an MLA can talk to people. And I understand that we're all in different parts of the province. And so I have direct access to the students in Edmonton Decor, maybe a little bit more surrounding besides that, but I don't have access to the rest of the province as easily as I do in Edmonton Decor. This committee gives me that opportunity, and I'm happy to give away again.
I want to thank my friend from Edmonton Decor for recognizing this intervention, and I just want to underline the point that he's trying to make, because I think he's identified a significant weakness in the consultation processes that the Advanced Education Ministry has undertaken in the past. And I will admit that even when I was in the minister's position in that ministry, we didn't take this into consideration very well either. But it's hearing from potential students about what the barriers are that they face. Right? One of the mistakes that advanced education makes is that they talk to the students who are already in the system about what they need to be able to continue on with their studies. The advanced education ministry doesn't do a very good job of talking to potential students and hearing from those who have decided already before they even graduate from high school that they aren't going to university or college, and understanding what drives that decision. So I really want to thank my friend from Edmonton Decor for that important point.
Yeah, no, and thanks to my friend from Edmonton Goldbar for pointing that out. It at least lets me know that what I'm hearing from the students to be in post-secondary education and the challenges that they're facing is not just in my area. It's in others, and I think we need to take that very, very seriously. These are our future emerging leaders. These are the ones that are going to be coming up from behind to replace all of us in leadership positions. Would it not make sense to be able to at least set things up somewhat in the direction that they want to see it go? One of the other things I did want to point out before my time ends here with this amendment, it would also be a very good chance for us to be able to explore this Minister's Advisory Council on Higher Education and Skills. I had some concerns around some of the language that I saw within the bill, and this will give us the opportunity to be able to dig into this a little bit further. Because I did hear the Minister for Advanced Education talking about wanting to provide more autonomy to post-secondary educations to be able to make decisions that best fit their institutions. And on the surface, that sounds good. And it's not that I'm necessarily against this advisory council. You know, the Students' Advisory Council to the Minister of Education, which I remember some of my students from Edmonton Core sitting on that. What an incredible experience and opportunity, not only for them, but for us to be able to hear from those up-and-coming students. My gosh, I mean, one of my students from a junior high sat on that committee. Just absolutely amazing. But by sending a committee, we'll get a chance to look at this, because the language that I'm seeing presented here within the bill has some challenges. You know, as I'd mentioned on page 13, under powers and duties, 107.2, sub 1 and 2, those two paragraphs are actually conflicting with each other. You know, I don't know if that was a mistake. Is that intentional to try to make it confusing? But again, as I've always said, you know, when we're crafting language here in this assembly, it's not for us. It's never for us. We understand what's supposedly going to be happening or what's supposed to happen. It's for the people that are coming after us who might not have access to us to be able to ask. Can they read this clearly and understand what it means as we understand it right now? And those two are conflicting. And as I mentioned, when we get to sub 3, and we talk about you know, the greatest degree of autonomy, but yet things are being directed by the minister. Not by the council, by the minister. That doesn't suggest autonomy to me. So again, we've got these diametrically opposed ideas that are bumping into each other. And because of that statement, when we talk about, you know, meeting with groups like students or academic staff members, presidents, board chairs, because the minister decides who the group actually meets with, does that give the minister the opportunity to maybe skip a group? Which is a problem. And Madam Speaker, as you served in the 29th legislature, one of the things that the opposition had a very significant problem with at that time was any kind of powers that were given to a minister to make decisions. It seemed it always wanted somebody else except the minister. And yet here we are seeing yet again, and I've seen this throughout the course of the 30th legislature, giving powers to the minister. And so when I talked about that challenge, you know, when I hear these things, you know, from members of the government benches, members of the government caucus that served earlier, do you actually believe that? Or was it just something you said at the time? And so if you actually do believe that, just like you believed sending bills to committee was the smart thing to do, if you actually believe that, then you should have no problems actually sending Bill 74 to the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future for further study. And by voting against this, then really what you're saying is you never believed that stance to begin with. And so that's my challenge, is, you know, is that actually part of your value system, or was it just something that you wanted to say because it seemed convenient or something at the time? And so I would like to see the Bill 74 head to committee to be able to look at some of these things, get a chance to consult further, you know, once we can see that list, hopefully, fingers crossed, about who is consulted with. Maybe we can add a few more to that list and get a chance to talk to them. I know that was also a problem for some members back then. They always felt that, well, you didn't consult with this group or this individual, you know, whatever the list was. It almost never lined up, quite honestly, with the list that we had. I would like to see that same opportunity afforded then to me now that I'm a member of the opposition. So there's my challenge. I'm hoping that we will see that list. We'll see a favorable outcome for this referral motion to send it to committee and get a chance to talk to people about this path to 2030, how they felt, maybe for instance, about the elimination of STEP and how that could affect their path forward, maybe some of the challenges that people are experiencing if, you know, they're going back to further their education. as my friend from Edmonton, Whitemud has always been very, very in tune to around childcare, what kind of things that we can do to help those students so that they can go back, make their lives better for them and their children. Some of the up-and-coming students, the barriers that they're facing, whether it be financial or others, like mental health supports, things like that. And, maybe we can have a very open and frank conversation around what brings businesses to Alberta, because we've clearly heard that in this discussion too. It's been made very, very obvious that a simple corporate tax break is not enough. Otherwise, we should have seen businesses, big corporations absolutely flocking to Albertan, because it was very much signaled even before the 2019 election that this was going to happen. So it's not like they didn't have a heads up, and they knew where the finish line was going to be before the race even started. And so what is it that actually brings them to Alberta?
The Honourable Member for Cardston-Siksika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to rise today and speak to the amendment moved by the Honourable Member from Edmonton South. I should begin my arguments or my comments by saying that I will not be supporting this amendment, this referral amendment. I assume that comes as a significant shock to the members opposite that we would not be supporting a referral amendment moved by them. However, I do believe there's a number of reasons why, and I'll get to maybe one or two of them right now. But the first of which is time. We are now in the second week of debating Bill 74, and there has been ample time for members opposite to rise in this chamber and to speak on this bill and give their feelings about post-secondary education in the province. Without question, an important topic. I myself have a post-secondary degree and also have a master's degree, and I see the value in education. And the province does as well, the government here does as well. But with that said, in order to make post-secondary education what we see the vision for it in the Alberta 2030 plan, we have to actually pass legislation that gets us there. And that includes Bill 74, the Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act 2021. So, while I would not ever look at suppressing an opportunity for a member to give their feelings on this bill, either both in the chamber and outside of the chamber, at least on this one specifically. If there comes a time where we need to see progress so that we can work for Albertans, then actions will have to be taken by members on this side. And there is precedence for that in this chamber. So to that point, Madam Speaker, I do see that there is no need for a referral motion. Members opposite are having ample time, both in second reading, committee of the whole, and third reading to speak to this bill. Further reviewing in the committee, the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Futures would not be necessary. Now, to my feelings about the bill. I believe the members are opposite have based their entire argument on the premise that trajectory to success follows a singular and linear path, which is junior high school, post-secondary, and then landing a job. But I do find, and has been in my experience speaking with some constituents, that that is not the only way to find success. In Cardston, for example, and in many places, many other towns in southern Alberta, members of the community, after graduating high school, will do maybe a gap year. Some will do something similar to what I did, which was after my first year of university, I left Canada. I went to Russia, where I lived for 2 years, doing a service mission for my church. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. And in coming back to Alberta, I think I had a better idea of what I wanted to do. I also learned a new language. I learned the opportunity to speak Russian and met a ton of friends and really had an eye-opening experience over there as to what it's like living in other countries and other cultures and the opportunities afforded to them. It also if I may say, gave me a much deeper appreciation for this country of Canada and this province of Alberta, a place that has done so much for me, my family, and for families across this province and across this country. It's a beautiful place to be, and a place that both my grandfathers fought in World War II. And I won't take any intervention at this exact moment, but when the time comes, I will certainly inform the chamber. I just haven't finished my thought yet, members, so I appreciate that. But there is no singular trajectory to success. And so when looking at what your future may or may not be, you do have to analyze some of the risks involved with that. And there are, of course, financial risks involved. And that goes with tuition. I have heard a number of times this morning members keep referencing tuition, the cost of tuition. Alberta's tuition is certainly in line with other jurisdictions in the country. I have a degree from Dalhousie University where tuition is quite high, but I also paid for that tuition, similar to the member from Edmonton Decor with a basketball scholarship. Now, people will say, well, you just played sports to pay for tuition. Well, I spent more than 20 hours a week committed to that program. If you convert that into hours worked in a retail environment, the numbers effectively work out almost the same. So I certainly made a sacrifice in order to pay for my own tuition, in addition to taking out student loans. But I also understood generally where I wanted to go with my career. I would say, as an aside note, being a politician wasn't exactly at the forefront of my ideas, but certainly wanted to work in this industry. And so worked towards that. But it was an investment for me, Madam Speaker. It was a significant investment for me and my wife, because I also did a master's degree in political strategy from George Washington University. And that was an incredible experience. I learned a ton about campaign management and policy development, but it did not come at a small cost financially. But I wasn't going to allow that cost to be the only barrier for me entering the world that I so love today. So I had to make sacrifices, and I understand that cost can be a barrier. But I would also suggest, Madam Speaker, that when looking at a future career, when looking at education, one must take into consideration the financial risk. I have seen firsthand experiences where students are going to university with the intent of spending 4 years to find themselves. That comes at a significant financial cost. Student debt can be crippling for so many, and trust me, I know very well what student debt can do and the stresses that it can put on you and put on people that are around you. So those need to be considered. So I would hate for members opposite to argue that student debt is the only barrier to post-secondary. It is a significant one, but it's the one that members opposite keep referencing. And it is to suggest that it is the government's responsibility to alleviate the stresses of the real world. Financial stress is a real stress. A member from Red Deer South spoke quite eloquently, and I wish I would have had the opportunity to take his tax course. It would have been absolutely riveting, I'm certain. But Madam Speaker, education is very important. But post-secondary or getting an undergraduate degree may not be for everyone. I have lots of constituents who do very well for themselves who decided to forgo university, get into agriculture, or take a different path. And they're all the better for it. It doesn't make having an undergraduate degree less or more so much as it wasn't their path. So I would hope that members opposite would understand, and I can't assume that they do or they don't, that education is important, but to suggest that the moves the government's making and the bills that we're putting forward are creating barriers for education and university students to get this degree, I think would be false. And I would take interventions at any point now. I do see the member from Lethbridge East.
Thank you very much to the member. Again, it's hard to know exactly when to interject without a point being made, but I appreciate the clarity brought through that. I think he brings up a very valid point, Madam Speaker, that the decisions that go into your education are vast. And I would like to hear this member share a little bit more about his journey, if he's willing. From what I heard, he was at least at 2 or 3 post-secondary institutions in that knowledge. And given the depth and breadth of Dalhousie and Washington and Russia in that mix, I can't believe that cost was the only factor that motivated him. It doesn't seem like those was necessarily a low-cost avenue to the goal and the future that he fought for and desired for his life. So I'd like to hear the other things that compelled him to seek those opportunities, to make those sacrifices, both financially and relationally, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Honourable Member. It does give me an opportunity briefly to talk a little bit more about my education path. As I had said previously in this chamber in other sessions, when I first went into university, I considered myself more of an athletic student, but that changed after my time living overseas where I became a student athlete. So I actually spent my first year of university at Simon Fraser in British Columbia, on top of the hill, as they say. And it was certainly an eye-opening experience, but after a year there, I realized it wasn't really the place for me. After my time living overseas, I transferred to the University of Calgary, where I continued my education and my athletic pursuits, playing basketball there, but ultimately decided that I wasn't really enjoying what was my experience there, and decided ultimately to transfer to Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. So you could say I went from coast to coast, learned the most, had a blast. Dalhousie, what a time to be alive it was. But after that, I went and played professional basketball, and then decided to do a master's degree. And that's where I spent some time in Washington, D.C., learning about the ways of this political world. But at no point did I look at the financial barriers exclusively. I looked at the opportunity that education would afford me, and I would like to say, in my own humble personal opinion, that I am better off for that education. But it certainly was a sacrifice for me and for my wife as we have worked to pay off those student loans and those financial commitments. But I thought it was worth it. Because to me, Madam Speaker, it was an investment. It was an investment in my career, an investment in my family, investment in my children, and ultimately learn skills that I will be able to pass on to my own kids. And should they pursue a career in politics, I can teach the heck out of campaign management. So there's that, Madam Speaker. But the other thing here is, this idea of just giving away education. Oh, I would certainly give way to the honourable member from Lac-Saint-Anne Parkland.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and most times I'm looking up at you, except in the back row, and I can see you eye to eye. So the experiences that we have when it comes to education, and through you, obviously, to the member, Madam Speaker, that there is no risk without reward. There is no pain with no gain. Those are items that actually test the merit and strengthen, I would propose, to a lot of folks. If it's too easy, anybody can do it. And I think that shows true a lot of times we're talking about mental stresses with students. The coping mechanisms that you have to do that when you have deliverables. It's not insurmountable, and it's worth it. We need to temper our students to do that. And with that, I'd like to ask the member if he could expand on that. Some of the things that he had to go through that made him have that fortitude, that not only the successes, but some of the failures and the trips to make you who you are today and to be such a leader in your community.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for those questions. Certainly, I could touch on a couple of things I had to overcome. They might seem minor, but one is motion sickness. Reading on a bus for hours on end is not easy. And that sounds a bit ridiculous, but it is the truth. Reading textbooks, very dense content. The other, of course, is frankly the financial commitment. Debt and interest weighs heavily on the mind and the heart. Madam Speaker, I understand if anyone has a mortgage or has student loans that they're thinking about, or credit card debt, whatever it may be, whatever kind of debt you carry, debt is always there and it is always accumulating. The other thing I would say is physical fatigue. While I can understand working a shift at a restaurant or a retail store is very difficult and earnest work. It is different than work that I was used to working university, staying up late for practices, going to the weight room, and then having to stay up late even later and study when I'm already exhausted, getting up for 6 a.m. practices. Those are, trying to manage your diet well. I know a lot of my roommates in university had a strong diet of ramen noodles. It just wasn't going to cut it for me. I was consuming a lot of calories on a daily basis and needed to do that. But I actually, speaking to the member from Lac City and Parkland's comments with regards to the personal sacrifice, I believe it was Thomas Paine in his American Crisis. He said that what we obtain cheaply, we esteem too lightly. Madam Speaker, what we obtain cheaply, we esteem too lightly. And that's just it. If it was easy, everybody would do it. The greater the potential risk, the greater the potential reward. And people who have the fortitude to step forward and take that risk, be it financial or otherwise, there is a potential reward there, but also opportunity for failure. And I can't substantiate this, but I heard that once the Walt Disney went bankrupt 6 times before he hit it big with his ultimate success. There are lessons learned there, Madam Speaker. Life is not going to be given to any of us. We have to work for it. And I actually have to take a moment again and commend every member of this chamber, because running for office in and of itself, we are one of 87 members occupying this job in the entire province. It makes it a pretty unique position, and it's one that is sought after by many, and one that takes a lot of personal sacrifice to even decide whether you're going to do it. And then, of course, there's the idea of winning. So you take the risk of throwing your name on a ballot, take the risk of throwing your name on a nomination ballot, and working hard and selling memberships or however the process works in your own individual party, only to maybe not be successful. And then what? There's risk everywhere, Madam Speaker, risk all around us. And I think the whole purpose of what I'm getting at here is, as a, honestly, and if the member from Edmonton Highlands Norwood has something that they'd like to say, more than welcome to stand and ask me an intervention. I'd be happy to take one, but otherwise, it would be customary to maintain decorum within the chamber while other members are speaking. But with that said, Madam Speaker, I do think it is important that we move forward with this piece of legislation with the intent of making Alberta the most attractive jurisdiction in the country to work, to live, to get an education, whatever that may be, whatever that may look like, whether it's on-the-job training or whether it's in the classroom training or both. Alberta has an incredibly bright future, Madam Speaker. I'm so proud of this province and the residents here and all the work they've put into making it what it is. People who came before me and the people who came before them. It's a beautiful country and it's a beautiful province, and I tell you, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But that's why I decided to run, so that I could be part of making this a better place. And this piece of legislation certainly creates an environment that Alberta students can become leaders in the world. Given the commodities that we have in our province, we are a world player, Madam Speaker. We are. And we have to act like it. And though we may not get treated like that by Ottawa in many instances, we're not just going to lay over and allow Ottawa to dictate to us the Alberta way. So, with these remarks, I will simply conclude by saying this. I think this is an important piece of legislation. The amendment, though maybe well intended by the honourable member from Edmonton South, is not one that I would encourage my members on this side of the House and all members to support. Because we have an opportunity to create an environment for post-secondary education in this province that is second to none and world-class. And this is part of it. But I say, let's get moving with this legislation, vote in favor, and make Alberta one of the most prosperous jurisdictions in the world.
Any other members wishing to join the debate? Traditionally, we would go to a member of the opposition now, which would be the honourable member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Madam Speaker, and hopefully we'll get a chance to hear from the minister as well. But I've been dying to get my points in today, so thank you for this. But truly, I actually, advanced education post-secondary is an area that I'm quite passionate about, and I do have a number of comments that I would like to get on the record for Bill 74, and of course, in my remarks, aim to outline why it is it's necessary that this piece of legislation be referred to committee. You know, I've had the opportunity. Actually, this is I think this is the second time that I've got to hear all my colleagues in this chamber speak to this bill, and of course, you know, many of the people on this side of the house were part of government that prioritized investments in education writ large, particularly post-secondary education. And you know, many folks are aware of my own background in education, and particular in K-12 education, and starting my career, of course, teaching. And I've talked about this many times in this house, so apologies to my colleagues here for having to hear these stories once again, but I can imagine there are so many new people tuning in right now, waiting with bated breath to hear the story that I'm about to tell you, but including the member from Edmonton Whiteman, mostly her actually, so thank you. You know, one of the things I did, so I started teaching, I was at the spry age of barely 21 out in Balf, Alberta, and had the opportunity to, in fact, I was barely 21 and I had 19-year-olds in my class that I was teaching. So at that time I was, you know, a bit more, you know, for lack of a better word, feminine looking. So I brought out the pantsuits and the skirts and the high heels and really tried to make myself look extra old. I remember one blazer with shoulder pads, so just really looking like I was old. But I tell you that because I had a lot of conversations with students, with those high school students in particular. I taught a lot of the -2 students, so students who weren't in the academic courses, especially, you know, I just started teaching, and that was really cool opportunity, because a lot of those kids were really grappling with their future and what exactly they would do when they left high school, when they left the community of Balf. And you know, many kids didn't feel like they struggled with the fact that they didn't have a clear route mapped out. And I would always talk to them about the fact that, like, you don't need to have a plan mapped out. Life can change very, very quickly. And I mean, I'm a great example, because I still remember when I started teaching in Balf, Alberta, that I went to the main floor. Sadly, the school that I taught at is now gone and was replaced with a beautiful new school. But they had a wall of all the teachers that had taught there for, like, you know, 30 years, that sort of thing. I remember saying to one of my colleagues, I can't wait till my picture's up there because I want to teach you for the rest of my career. And I laugh, of course, because I ended up only teaching there for about 4.5 years. And then I went to another school in Forestburg, and then came to the big old city of Edmonton. And, you know, I would tell students, like, it's okay if you don't have your future mapped out. And just talking to them about the fact that it doesn't have to be, as one of the colleagues, or one of my colleagues across the floor stated, you know, it doesn't have to be university, right? I still remember talking with a student whose mom was really pushing him to go into engineering at the U of A. That was her dream for him. I knew the student well. I taught him. I knew that university engineering was not the place for him. He loved working with his hands. He was doing mechanics and whatnot at Balf. Sadly, we didn't have, like, a lot of programs like automotives and whatnot, but a lot of kids would do work experience, and he was so good at that, and he loved it, and he thrived. He absolutely thrived in that environment. And sadly, he gave in to the pressure of what his mom wanted for him, and went to the U of A into engineering. I think you can predict the outcome of the story. He dropped out in the first year. He dropped out in the first year and then ended up going into a trade. And I don't know because I haven't connected with him in a long time, but I know that he was thriving immediately afterwards, right? And so, and I can tell you, and my teaching career, of course, was short, but I can tell you just the number of conversations I had with kids and that nature, just to let them know that there's so many opportunities available to them and that there doesn't need to be this one clear path. And if you do choose one path and it changes, that's okay too. And, this just kind of, I hope serves to highlight just how important it is that we, as legislators in this province, offer those paths, right? So that kids have the opportunity to choose multiple paths, whatever that might be. Oh, I guess, I was in the midst of something incredible there, but I will cede to my colleague.
Thank you. And unfortunately, I guess my comment might not be as incredible, but I'm happy to ask, and I'm happy to hear those comments, because hearing from, I think, my colleagues who were teachers or taught in the past is so informative, because we're talking about creating an advanced education system that is supposed to work for these students, right? That's supposed to create and foster these opportunities for these students. And perhaps one of the things, and I know members have spoken a lot about tuition today, but my colleague was talking a lot about planning and how people can't always plan for where they will end up. And perhaps I'm wondering if students who do want to make those decisions or aren't sure where they're going are still looking to have stability, right? Because I think it's so important that when you're in your formative years and trying to make decisions about where you want to end up, that stability is something that allows you to weigh your options. And I'm wondering whether the impacts this government has made to tuition and stability of education and the massive cuts would have had impacts on your students in the past.
Yeah, absolutely, and I will. Yeah, I'll get to your point there around stability by noting that I was starting to say there that we need, as legislators, it's our responsibility to ensure that kids have options, whatever they might be, and I'm very much fearful that those options are becoming more limited for kids, right? And I think, of course, I used an example of a student going into the trades, but, we had a number of really incredibly academic students as well out there in Balf who chose to go to the university and go to other post-secondary institutions. I can think back to my own, childhood in Barhead, Alberta as well, right? I know there were a few of us who chose to go to the U of A in Edmonton, and others who chose to go to other academic institutions. And I taught a lot of kids out in rural Alberta, and I grew up with a lot of kids in rural Alberta who didn't have the financial means and didn't have a family that could provide support for tuition. And don't get me wrong, I was lucky myself to have a pretty stable upbringing, but I know that it wasn't that I still had to pinch pennies as a student and work really hard to get some scholarships as well. I had two older sisters who were also in university. So at one point, my parents had three girls all in university, and so they couldn't help us a lot. And it was on us to really try to support our own education. And so absolutely, to the member from Edmonton South, I worry greatly about this. And I think, I just think of that kid in Balf right now who's, struggling with their future and not sure which path that they're going to take, or that, there may not even be a path to take. And that's okay too. Don't get me wrong, I know someone mentioned that over there. Post-secondary of any form is not necessarily a right path for folks. But again, let me get back to why it's on us. Why it's on us as MLAs in this chamber to do whatever we can to support a robust post-secondary education for all Albertans. And I ask, we have so few times where we can really, the minister had few opportunities to introduce bills specific to his ministry. I know we've talked about a couple in the past in previous sessions. So I would ask him why it was, when there are so many pressing post-secondary issues, that this was his priority. What was it that made some of the key aspects of Bill 74 his priority? Because I have to tell you, these priorities aren't the ones that line up with the students that I've spoken to. And I'll get to that in a minute. First of all, I want to just talk about the fact that, I'm so concerned, and I know my colleagues have said this probably more aptly than me, but I'm so concerned about the fact that many students, many young people right now may be choosing to leave our province to study elsewhere. My fantastic colleague here from St. Albert talked about the fact that her own son, left to study elsewhere because he didn't see the opportunities here, particularly when you get into levels of higher education where you're looking at things like research opportunities and grants. When you're, one of the most historically esteemed institutions worldwide, world-class institutions, the University of Alberta, is being fully decimated. That makes it an unattractive place for young people to want to study or to start their academic careers, right? And I worry deeply that the decisions that this government is making is going to continue to push young people away. At a time, more than ever, we need to be bringing them here. We need to be keeping them here. We need to be attracting them. And when, tuition has risen by about 15%, when almost 1,500 FTEs, full-time equivalents, have been laid off in our post-secondary institutions, when the budget for advanced education has been cut by hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, these are all alarming numbers, which are resulting in equally alarming trends. And so let me talk a little bit about how I'm concerned that the priorities of this government when it comes to post-secondary education, advanced education, are not aligned with those of the folks that I've spoken with. And I have, like many people, at least on this side of the chamber, talked to students, talked to a whole number of staff, academic and non-academic, and others at various institutions. I'm lucky to have in my riding Concordia University, which is a fantastic institution that's doing a lot of really great things. Later today, I'm headed to the University of Alberta to speak to a class, and looking forward to being back on campus again. But in recent conversations that I've had, I've really dug in a little bit to some of the priorities that particularly students have, and I want to acknowledge the comments from my colleague from Edmonton Gold Bar, who noted that he admitted one of his shortcomings, one of his few shortcomings. Might I note that when he was minister, they didn't do a good job of engaging folks before they entered the post-secondary system, and I think that's a really, really important point, which I will let Edmonton South.
And my apologies, I feel like I always jump up at a little bit of an inopportune time. My colleague will cost me later for that, I'm sure. But certainly I think that one of the comments I think around consultations is very interesting because, and every government is going to be criticized for not doing enough consultation. I think that's a common thread in oppositions and in the media and in the public. But I think that on that idea, and hopefully this is where my honorable colleague was going, it is alarming, particularly how little consultation this government has done and how little they've talked to Albertans and the people who will actually be affected by some of this legislation. So perhaps my colleague can elaborate a little bit on that. I hope I haven't thrown off her vibe a little bit too much here, but I think that this is an important topic. I think it's important that we do have the opportunity to discuss why Albertans are so disenfranchised with this government in particular, why Albertans don't believe that this government has their best interest in mind, and hopefully my colleague from Edmonton Highlands Norwood will be able to elaborate.
Yeah, absolutely, and this this trend of inadequate consultation. I'm getting deja vu here because I know we've all on this side of the chamber risen multiple times to talk about how this this government has accused us of lack of consultation, and yet we can point to the countless examples in this government's short tenure that have shown inadequate consultation. And we've seen the power of people pushing back when they feel that they haven't been adequately consulted. Examples that come to mind include coal chopping off the tops of our mountains, parks, right? And even to some degree, we'll see, it's yet to be seen if this will be the case, but curriculum. I mean, Albertans are absolutely speaking out in huge, huge volumes on those issues because they felt that they hadn't been consulted and they're not being heard. And, I was just starting to note that the member from Gold Bar said that, one thing that is incredibly important is talking to students before they enter the post-secondary system, whatever form that might take. And I think back to my colleague from Edmonton Northwest, his time when he was education minister. Let me finish this thought, please. When he was education minister, had the Minister's Youth Council. And I saw that, I was working at the ministry, I saw the power of that youth council, kids from all corners of the province feeling like they were being heard and that their voices really matter. And I meet with young people all the time under the age of 18, and one of the things I always leave them with is don't let anyone, especially politicians, tell you or make you feel like your voices don't matter. Just because you can't vote doesn't mean your voice is not critical to these future decisions, right? And to these bigger conversations. And, do you want to, in the spirit of collegiality, I'm going to let the Minister of Advanced Education speak.
I appreciate that. Thank you to the member for accepting an intervention. I think that's very notable. I just wanted to take a minute, because I know that's all the time I have, just to make a comment as it relates to consultation. I know the member was just talking about that, and just to remind the Assembly that during the process of the development of Alberta 2030, we held 100 one-on-one interviews, 30 roundtable discussions, 6 town halls, received 5,600 survey responses, and as well established a guiding coalition to lead and guide the entire effort that included students. I think any comment that there hasn't been adequate consultation on the development of Alberta 2030, which is thus informing the developments in Bill 74, is a little misplaced. There's been numerous public statements from student leaders and post-secondary presidents who have commended the government for listening and for the level of consultation that occurred throughout the development of Alberta 2030 and the subsequent development of this legislation. So I just want to take the opportunity to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for that. And it's interesting that you brought up Alberta 2030. Gosh, I have so much more to say, but fortunately, we will have more opportunities, I'm sure. I had a chance to look through Alberta 2030, of course, that document, which I think was a result of the McKinsey report that cost around $3.7 million. Don't get me started on how those millions of dollars could have been spent otherwise. But looking at some of those goals. Developing skills for jobs, supporting commercialization, strengthening internationalization, system governance, sustainability. Many of these are admirable goals, absolutely. But I think back to a recent conversation I had with representatives from the Council of Alberta University Students, and they shared with us their priorities. And, I don't see much, if any, overlap between the priorities of this government and what countless students are asking for, right? And I'd really love to get into each of these pieces in a bit more detail, and I hope I can, because these are really critical topics, like ending gender and domestic violence, sexual violence on campus. We know it's a huge systemic issue that is going to need targeted, intentional action if we're going to improve it. And I think we can all agree on that, right? But we need to hear this minister talking about that and telling us what specifically he's going to do to make that priority something that's truly addressed. Expanding affordable childcare, right? We've talked about childcare, we've talked about the critical importance of that for students, yet we haven't heard this government, we haven't seen, with so much more to say, oh my goodness.
Honorable members, I see the clock strikes noon. That means the House is adjourned until 1:30 this afternoon.